You've been scrolling for 20 minutes. The number at the top of the listing keeps appearing. 450,000, 500,000, 580. And the homes attached to those numbers are not the homes you pictured when you thought about what your income was supposed to buy. The kitchens are smaller than you expected. The yards, where yards exist, are narrower. The commutes are longer. You close the tab and open it again, as if refreshing it might change the inventory. You earn good money. You know you earn good money. And yet somehow the math between what you earn and what you're looking at doesn't resolve into the life you imagined. Hello, I'm Lincoln, and there's something about a $100,000 salary that housing markets have quietly redefined. For most of the last 30 years, a six-figure income was a threshold, not just financially, psychologically. The people who crossed it understood that they'd arrived somewhere. The mortgage would be manageable. The options would be real. The house with the office and the yard and the neighborhood that was genuinely good, that house was available to someone who earned what you earn. $100,000 a year still carries the weight of arrival in the cultural imagination. And the cultural imagination, in this case, is simply wrong. That perception is still alive. You can feel it in the way you approach a job offer that crosses the number, in the way other people respond when it comes up. $100,000 a year still carries the weight of arrival in the cultural imagination. And the cultural imagination, in this case, is simply wrong. Or it's right, but only in some places, under some conditions, in ways that turn out to matter enormously. Because here is what the housing market has done to that number without anyone quite announcing it. It has made $100,000 a perfectly respectable income in some markets, a survivable income in others. And in the most expensive cities in the country, a number that qualifies you for a mortgage on something you might not have considered 5 years ago. What does the income actually buy? That depends almost entirely on where you ask the question. And the honest answer, the one the cultural story doesn't include, is that in a lot of the places where people who earn this income tend to live, it buys considerably less than the number implies. Let me draw a picture, not a chart, just a way of thinking through something. Imagine 3 people. Same resume, same title, roughly the same salary. Call it $100,000. They're all looking to buy. They've all been saving with the same intention, and they've all arrived at a similar down payment. The difference is where they live. The first person is in a major coastal metro: New York, San Francisco, Boston, Los Angeles. The housing market there doesn't really register $100,000 as meaningful purchasing power. The entry-level options, not luxury, not impressive, just functional homes in reasonable neighborhoods, are priced at 4, 5, 6 times what their income can comfortably support. They can qualify for something. But qualifying and affording are different things, and the gap between them is where the financial stress lives. The second person is in a mid-tier city: Denver, Nashville, Austin before the last decade's run-up, Atlanta, Phoenix. $100,000 used to buy real options here. In some of these markets, it still does. In others, the growth of the last several years has compressed the advantage significantly. What used to feel like the affordable alternative to coastal markets has, in a lot of cases, started to rhyme with them. The third person is somewhere smaller: a growing city in the Southeast, a mid-sized Midwest market, a place where $100,000 is still a strong income relative to local housing costs, where the down payment reaches further, where the mortgage payment leaves real room in the monthly budget. This person is buying a genuinely different life with the same number, same income. 3 very different versions of what it buys. The moment when the income illusion breaks, when the number stops meaning what you thought it meant, usually happens sometime in the first real search. You've been pre-approved. You have a number on a letter that says you qualify for a mortgage of a certain size. And then you start looking, and the experience of looking is different from the experience of imagining. The homes in the neighborhoods you want are priced beyond the comfortable end of the approval letter. The homes within the comfortable range are in neighborhoods that require a longer consideration, or a longer commute, or a more honest conversation with yourself about what you were actually expecting. This is the moment most buyers experience as a disappointment they don't quite name. They don't say, "The market has redefined my income." They say, "We'll have to adjust our expectations," or "We'll buy a starter and move up in a few years." All of those framings contain truth, but they also contain a kind of management, a way of processing the gap between the cultural story about what the income means and the market reality of what it buys, without fully examining what the gap is telling you. What is $100,000 actually worth in the city where you're looking? Here's a story. His name is Kevin. He moved to Seattle at 30 for a software role that put his income over the threshold for the first time. He felt, arriving, that he had crossed something. The job was real. The money was real. The city was expensive, he knew that, but expensive was something people said about places before they actually lived there and discovered the adjustments. He rented for 2 years while he oriented. He was saved seriously. When he started looking at buying, he was disciplined. He'd talked to advisors, run estimates, approached it with the kind of rigor he brought to his work. And the market told him something he hadn't entirely prepared for. What his income supported comfortably in Seattle was a condo or a small house significantly farther from the city center than he'd imagined living. The neighborhoods he'd been thinking of when he thought about homeownership in Seattle were not neighborhoods his income reached without significant strain. He bought it. He stretched slightly, because the neighborhood mattered to him, and the commute from the further options was real and daily, and the time cost was something he'd thought about. 3 years in, the payment is manageable, everything he projected it to be, but the margin is thinner than he planned for. The financial flexibility that he expected to arrive with the income hasn't fully arrived, because the city absorbed most of the difference between what he earns and what his life costs. He opened a transfer calculator once, looked at comparable roles in other markets, and considered what the numbers would look like elsewhere. Then he closed it. The network is here. The team is here. The life he built around the job and the neighborhood and the city is here. He has a home. He doesn't quite have the financial life he pictured when he pictured himself earning what he earns. Now a different version. Her name is Rachel. Same rough income, same professional level, same background of careful financial thought. She'd lived in Chicago for 5 years and understood what $100,000 bought there. When she and her husband started seriously talking about buying, they also seriously talked about where. They moved to Columbus. Good city, growing market, a professional environment with real opportunities in her field. The income that had been adequate in Chicago, just adequate, with serious intentionality, became something different in Columbus. The house they bought was not a compromise. It was genuinely what they wanted, at a price that left room. Room in the monthly budget, room in the savings rate, room to absorb the year when the furnace failed and the car needed work and the medical bill arrived, all in the same 4-month stretch, without any of it becoming a crisis. Rachel will tell you she misses things about Chicago, the specific energy, some of the people. She doesn't romanticize the move or present it as a universal solution, but she's also honest about the financial reality. The $100,000 she earns in Columbus does something that the same $100,000 didn't do in Chicago. It builds, slowly but consistently, in a way that compounds across years into something that actually changes what's possible. What did you think the income was going to create? Is that what it's creating? Here is the part that doesn't appear on any mortgage pre-approval letter. The housing choice doesn't just affect the payment. It affects the texture of the life built around the payment. It affects the commute, which affects the hours, which affects the energy left for everything else. It affects the size of the space, which affects how the space is used and who can occupy it comfortably and what kind of home life becomes possible inside it. It affects the neighborhood, which affects the schools and the community and the social infrastructure that shapes daily experience in ways that money alone can't replicate. And it affects the margin, the room in the budget that determines whether a difficult year is a setback or a crisis. Whether a career pivot is a considered choice or a luxury you can't afford. Whether the financial life the income was supposed to create actually materializes, or whether the cost of the housing absorbed it before it had a chance to accumulate into something. This is the trade-off that doesn't fit neatly into any affordability calculator. The calculator tells you whether you can make the payment. It doesn't tell you what life looks like after you do. A few years into home ownership, the true cost of the housing decision becomes visible in a specific way. Not in the balance sheet necessarily, in the quality of the decisions available to you. Someone who bought at the edge of their income's capacity finds that certain kinds of professional risk feel unaffordable now. The job offer has a better trajectory but a lower initial salary. The project that requires a period of reduced certainty before the upside materializes. The period of time between jobs that would allow for genuine consideration of what comes next rather than urgent acceptance of the first option that appears. These decisions, for someone whose housing cost leaves real margin, are difficult but possible. For someone whose housing cost has consumed the margin, they're simply not available. The income that was supposed to create options has, in the wrong market at the wrong price point, quietly funded a structure that reduces them. When did the income stop feeling like what you thought it was? There's something underneath all of this that's worth naming directly. Something that operates before the financial calculation and shapes the choices that follow. $100,000 income still carries a cultural story. A story about what the income is supposed to look like, where you live, the type of neighborhood, the kind of home, the version of stability and arrival the number is supposed to represent. And that story is powerful enough to shape housing decisions in ways that aren't primarily about the housing. You've seen it. You may have felt it. The sense that the home should match the income in some visible way. That buying in the cheaper market, or the smaller city, or the neighborhood that requires some explanation is somehow not the right expression of what you've earned. That the upgrade, the stretch, the slightly beyond comfortable purchase is simply what someone at this income level does. The story isn't false. The story is just expensive. And it costs most in the markets where housing prices have already priced the story far beyond what the income can comfortably sustain. This is the version of the housing decision that almost nobody examines out loud. Not the payment, not the commute, not even the square footage. The quiet question of whether the home you're buying is the home your income actually supports, or the home the story about your income says you should have. The two things are not always the same. In a lot of markets right now, they're not even close. Here is what the housing decision ultimately produces over time. Not just a home, a financial structure. A set of monthly obligations that determines the range of choices that remain available to you in the years that follow. A baseline that the income has to sustain before any of it can become investment or savings or the kind of financial buffer that makes real flexibility possible. In the right market, at the right price point, $100,000 income can build that structure generously. The payment is real but manageable. The margin is real and maintained. The compounding that the income was supposed to enable actually happens. Not dramatically, quietly, across years in the way that patient financial structures tend to work. In the wrong market, at the wrong price point, $100,000 funds a structure that requires most of what you earn to sustain. The home is real, the life around it is real, but the financial freedom the income was supposed to create. The room to try things, absorb disruption, invest the difference, build toward something that doesn't require the next paycheck. That version of the income never quite arrives. The question isn't whether $100,000 is a good income. It is. In most places, under most circumstances, it is. The question is what the market where you choose to live does to that income. Whether the housing that income buys there is a foundation for the financial life you're trying to build, or whether it's the ceiling of what the income can sustain, with very little left over for anything else. You looked at the listings, you saw the numbers. You closed the tab and opened it again. What were you actually looking for in those numbers? Not just square footage, not just the mortgage estimate. Something about what the income was supposed to mean, what the house was supposed to confirm. Is the market where you're looking the place where that income does what you need it to do? You closed the tab. You opened it again. That's worth noticing.